Greetings. My name is Jennifer Leath, and I'm here with Dr. Gloria White-Hammond and Dr. Ray Hammond, and I'm delighted to be with these two founding pastors of Bethel, Boston, and look forward to hearing a bit from each of them on this topic of Black LGBTQ folks and the church. And so let's begin. Um, I'd like to just invite you to introduce yourselves in any other further way as you see fit, and maybe in your introduction of yourself, sharing a bit about how you explain the ways your positions have evolved with respect to LGBTQ plus matters.
Sure. Well, I can at least begin by introducing myself. I'm Gloria White-Hammond, as you know. My background is as a physician, practiced for almost 30 years in a community health center here in Boston with diverse pediatricians. And so I spend time taking care of kids and families through the generations. And I'm also, as you've noted, a co-pastor at Bethel with a wonderfully diverse congregation, largely African American, and people who are deeply committed to social justice and ministry, not only in the church, but in the public square.
And Ray Hammond, also co-pastor at Bethel, a native of Philadelphia, grew up in the Baptist church, but came to the AME church in college. As I sensed God's call to enter into ministry, really wrestled with, I don't know, do I do Baptist? Do I do AME? And was really drawn, I think, by a combination of the community of people I encountered there who had helped me think about my faith in more in justice terms and more in global terms, and wanting to continue to be a part of that community and contribute to it. And so we've been pastoring together now for 36 years, and it's been a tremendous and wonderful journey. This issue of the church's response and recognition and inclusion of the LGBTQ community, I think, is one of the critical theological, critical social justice issues, critical moral issues that we have to face in the coming decades. Certainly, as we continue to think about these issues of equity, race, gender, and now also gender identity, social and sexual orientation. I think the world is looking, but even more importantly, our children are looking. And what we do or don't do will have a powerful impact on the church's leadership or lack thereof, one or the other. And as I say, I know how hard this issue is, because I've grown up with a very traditional view. Thankfully, had parents who were, I think, sensitive and respectful of everybody, and would be, horrified at anyone being bullied or in any way treated. But very much of that mind that says, this is a lifestyle choice, and it's sinful, and we don't hate anyone for it. We're certainly not going to be a part of persecuting anyone for it, but it's just not compatible with being a faithful Christian. And I've been involved in some of the public debate about this, and as I say, I think the combination of working with members of the LGBTQ community, working with members of my family who are part of the LGBTQ community, and coming to the place of saying, is it possible, as we've had to re-examine traditional views about slavery, or traditional views about divorce, or traditional views about women in leadership and in ministry, is it possible that we need to really re-examine our issues or the church's stance here as well? And the more that I became open to that and actually started looking at it, the more it became clear to me that while I understand the reasons for which people may have the traditional views, we're at a place in space, in time, where just as in all these other areas, we need to step back and say, perhaps our traditional interpretations and translations are not correct. And the result of that is that we are harming, hurting people that we love, people that Jesus died for, brothers and sisters. So that's been a journey. And it has not been easy, but I'm grateful to have been on it.
Yeah. And for me, the journey has been informed in three different ways. One, professionally, again, I practiced pediatrics in a community health center for almost 30 years. And in that context, had an opportunity to watch lots of children grow up and become who they become, and then oftentimes come back with their own children. So that has been very exciting. And I became aware of that, of how some of my children evolved in terms of sexual identity. Obviously, they identified biologically as male or female, and pretty much we operated in that binary. But I could see in some kids fairly early on that the way that they carried themselves was counter to the way they identified biologically. And it was fascinating to see the way that evolved. And early on, you could start to see some of the discomfort and even sense of shame, especially I'd say with some of my teenagers, that they felt as they were doing that work of evolution. I remember one young man who was in his early teens, who I was pretty confident was gay. And this was at during the AIDS struggle, and I wanted to be able to talk with him about that and some of those risks. And I asked him, "Are you gay, or do you find that you're attracted to males?" And he denied it. And he sat with it for a while. You could see the sense of pain that he had, even as I was asking, he was denying. I'm grateful that he subsequently came out and is thriving and doing well. But that sense of shame, you could see. I had a mother who came to me, I'd taken care of her child, who was anxious, and she's a committed Christian, very deeply involved in a congregation, and said that her son came out as gay and wanted her to accept that that's who he was. She really struggled with that. She said that she knew when the child was 6 months that he was probably, something was different about him. And again, just really the pain of thinking through how to interact with him. And I asked her, how did she interact with him before she had that disclosed to her? And she talked about the love that she had for them, the time that they enjoyed, et cetera. And I said, do what you've done before and love that child. And so she did. And I continue to be inspired by the health and vitality of their relationship. So again, for many people, it's not, it is who they are. And that's what I've come to appreciate as a form of it's just a part of their identity. It's not a lifestyle choice. It is who they are, the same way I am a Black Christian woman, and all of that identity. I'm a mom. That is part of my identity. And it's important to me that people accept me in the fullness of my identity. So that there's first, again, professionally, then obviously pastorally, some of the pain that I've heard in the context of interacting with some of our members who are gay. And again, not a lifestyle choice, painful conversation, and the importance and the appreciation for the congregation accepting them as they are. And personally, we have a young teenager who is identifies as non-binary, and we love them, and again, in the fullness of their identity.
Thank you both so much. There are a couple things that you've mentioned that I just want to pick up on, and one of them is love. Oftentimes we'll see love is love in the rainbow colors, especially during Pride season, and there's this idea and reminder that that love has something to do with this. And while the conversation has often been reduced to sex or to ideas about sex, love is something that's completely different and distinct. And the question is, what's love got to do with your perspective and approach with respect to LGBTQ plus folks? Thinking back to how you encouraged the woman who knew her son was different as early as 6 months. um, what does love have to do with this? And this question also, I should say, comes from a place of hearing religious leaders say, "I love you," but I hate the sin, and also the idea that one can love but still correct or still chastise or still encourage growth or development, and that the two can coexist. And so just want to hear you think a little bit, both of you, about love and how it is a part of this conversation.
I think every moral advance I can think of, every justice advance has had in many ways at its root love that makes people challenge not just the larger society, but themselves. Love that grows out of actually dealing with people and not abstract ideas. And the love of people who are willing to walk with you through the process of trying to think or rethink the way you've always thought that things were. And of course, I think you as I say, when you have people who are members of your family or close friends, and they share with you their orientation or their identity, and it's love that says this person is as dear and important to me today. Nothing's changed, right? So I think it's very much at the root of the process. And as I say, I think that's true not just here, but again, almost every major moral advance that we've made. Again, going back to slavery. I mean, there's nothing in the Bible that says you can't have slaves. Nothing. I think it's love and this notion that the Bible doesn't say I can't do it, but how could I love a brother or sister that is that I've essentially made my property? That's incompatible. It's incompatible with equality. That's incompatible with a God who has created us all equal. Again, I think you can say, yeah, there are passages that say, women should be quiet in the church. I suffer not a woman to have authority over a man, so on. I get that, okay, but love says, well, wait a minute, isn't there something about in Christ there being neither male nor female? What, I mean, how is it that we somehow cut off 50% of our gifts and deny the fullness of those gifts to the entire body. And so I think, for at least for me, a driving force for change is love that is constantly saying, how do I in fact seek the best for all, for my brother, for my sister? How do I not try to draw a circle to keep them out, but draw a larger circle that brings them in?
Yeah, yes. I mean, and Dr. White-Hammond, anything to add there, or as as
Not really, Jennifer. I mean, I absolutely agree that love is really at the core of this. And again, given that we're accepting people in the fullness of their identity, that, then we love them for who they are. No, we all of us have our struggles and the things that we wonder and worry about. But for many people, again, I embrace myself as Black. I embrace myself as Christian. I embrace myself as female, and I do likewise for others who you believe God has called you to be. Affirm that and embrace that and accept that and include that in our community.
so what I hear you saying is love assumes a sense of equality and equity,
Absolutely.
and in love, with love, there are no second class folks. There are no folks who are by design, by creation, on the outer realm of the circle.
Yeah.
um, and so that's I think a helpful way to rethink and remember love, love as something that does not exclude in that sort of way. Um, so I want to also go back to another part of uh, the narrative that you shared with us, Dr. White-Hammond, regarding um, the the young man who you wanted to say something to, and you did ask. You said, are you? And the response was no. And then later on, the same person did come out. I've had that experience as well, and can relate. Um, and also know how hard it is um, to disclose um, and and honor the struggle that so many are still living in, and the choices that people make around disclosure. I want to invite your reflections on how we cultivate a culture of honesty, especially as it pertains to diverse sexual identities and gender identities and sexual orientations, and why this is relevant or important as we continue to have these dialogues. What does truth have to do with it?
Yeah. Well, I think, again, and we've done some work, there's a very basic work in terms of what God says about how we honor, show respect and affirm the dignity of others. I think we also appreciate that for many of us, again, this isn't that we've evolved. And it's a work in and of itself to come to that place of acceptance. And for me, it had been, again, as you've heard from my own journey, it's been informed especially by interactions with people that, not just people they over there, but they're people that I know who are part of my community, really listening to the struggle that they've had and being able to affirm and come alongside them in the context of that struggle. And to appreciate the clunkiness of the interaction for the ways that we've thought we've just always thought this way. This is just what I know. And that's true for people who are LGBTQ, and that's true for people who who express concern and take exception to, quote, a lifestyle. But we stay in the conversation and always make sure that the conversation is informed by a love that, again, affirms their dignity and respects their identity. And in that sense, we recognize that not only is there room at the cross for them, but there's room in our pews and room for full inclusion in our communities.
It's powerful, and I think that your naming of the clunkiness of these conversations is important, because I think that it reminds us to leave, as it's been said, space for grace, because it's not possible to reduce it, for instance, one might say, to a matter of honesty, or or um, or just simply a kind of straight um, uh, interpretation of what is happening in a given moment. And I think that this cuts in multiple directions. For instance, with also the ways that we kind of stumble and kind of gain our bearings when it comes to terms and categories. I know that there are a lot of people who are really not sure how to keep up with the changing language around gender and sexuality, and knowing how to make sure that the right proper gender pronouns are used, or even categories like, um, should we still be thinking about this in terms of nature and nurture? Is this identity? You've already named this, the naming, the term lifestyle. um, is it appropriate? Does it fit even to talk about homosexuality? These are all questions, I think, that are very live, and they are dynamic. And so, yeah.
And the reality is that, again, none of this is new. I've lived long enough to have been called Negro, colored, Black, African American. I was even Afro American at one point, right? Um, all of the above. A person of African descent, BIPOC, right? I mean, all of it. We've been through it. And sure, it's a little difficult keeping up, but each iteration is about being a little bit more aware of the complexity of human society and connection and community. And that's what makes it worth it. The other piece I would say is that um, the kind of the irony is, after all of those years of trying to define how we were going to name and talk about race, we then finally come to the conclusion race is a social construct, right? It's really, there's nothing genetic about it, right? And so again, we're not talking about doing anything here that we're not doing in so many aspects of our lives as we learn more, as we come in contact with people from whom in past generations you would largely have been segregated, or who would have been in the closet because it was simply too dangerous for them to come out. So this is, you know, this is, I think I consider it just a blessing. Yeah, it's complicated, takes time, takes energy, um, but um, but this is part for me of the journey of faith. This is the part of becoming more fully the people that God has called us to be. And in that process, I really am grateful for the grace of people who, when I took a public statement, a public stand against same-sex marriage, who from the LGBT community who came and sat down and said, "We want to talk to you, and we're not just here to berate you as a we know you care about people. We know the work that you've done with, you know, alienated and disaffected youth. We know that you've allied yourself with the marginal and been willing to do it. So we want you to understand something we think you don't understand well." And that, for me, was the beginning of the process of simply um, coming to appreciate that there was another aspect of the human community I had to learn something about. I just didn't know. And in that process, it had all kinds of ramifications, and including, as I say, going back to the word, to the Bible, to the verses that I thought I knew, and looking at them all over again and discovering that the interpretations, the translations, all of these things were not nearly as precise as I thought they were, or you know, that in fact there was real disagreement among scholars about what's going on here. So you know, on one level that's disconcerting because I know people like to keep things simple, but I don't think you can grow if you always want to just keep things simple and things under control.
Yeah. And it has been interesting to see the way the church has evolved over the centuries. Since it's a founding way all those many years ago. Uh, Obviously, one of the central issues was the inclusion of women in leadership roles, and we've seen some significant change. We've got a ways to go, but we have seen women again come from the pews to the into the pulpits and now onto the bench, and that's very exciting. We've still, again, got a ways to go. With regard to marriage, I can certainly remember some conversations when I was early in the church about divorce and remarriage, and the people, we push people not to divorce. And if they did divorce, then they weren't supposed to get remarried. And if they did remarry, then they couldn't serve in leadership roles. We've evolved with regard to how we think about marriage and divorce and remarriage. And so again, from the pew to the pulpit to the bench, we have people representing those categories who 100 years ago would not be where they are today. So we can revisit texts and develop newer understandings, and then revise the way we have done church, and that's and I applaud those that evolving.
You've named a couple scriptures along the way that where interpretation has shifted, or that you invoke even now to help us understand where we could be, where we should be, perhaps together. Neither male nor female is one of them, but I'm wondering if there are other scriptures or even forms of scriptural interpretation that you base your positions on now. I would almost want to term your interpretive approach, as I hear it, as, you know, a kind of not just a kind of hermeneutics of suspicion, but a hermeneutics of humility. um, and
Absolutely.
yeah, so maybe if you could say a little bit more.
Yeah, you know, I think you put your finger right on it, and the suspicion arises, if you will, if I might be, say, because I agree wholeheartedly with the Apostle Paul. We really do see through a glass dark. We do. that glass is dark because we have our own biases, our own life experiences. That glass is dark because we may not be inclined to buck the trends or the societal norms, even if there are translations or interpretations that are that are compatible, but would fly in the face of what everyone expects. And I say to people all the time, if you want to get a sense for the fact, you just go look at, take a verse, particularly some of these verses around sexual matters, or divorce, or any of a number of other things, right? And then, or the role of women, and then actually start looking at the multitude of ways in which it gets translated. Just get one of those, and then go look at the word itself. So I think what we've come to appreciate is, particularly when it comes to making decisions about what verses mean, it's critical to know the words, what those, why the, what's the word, what does that word mean? Actually, what are the multitude of meanings it might have? What's the context in which it's being used? What do we know about the cultural setting? Um, and and then how do you want to interpret that? Are we just going with a traditional interpretation because it's tradition? Or can that interpretation be revisited? And then we even gotten to the point of how we're going to apply it after we figure that out, right? What does the application look like? And I say to people all the time, this is not new. The church has been doing this from day one. Acts 15 is all about a church that on the one level only has this as scriptures, the Hebrew text. That's all it's got. And they're now saying, wait a minute, we're supposed to be going into all the world. We're supposed to be welcoming these Gentiles. And I'm sure that's partly why I say to this day, the only person who kind of really got it was Philip, because everybody else is having revival services up in Jerusalem. And Philip is going to Samaria, and Philip is going to the Ethiopian eunuch, right? And then having to go back and tell the apostles, hey, y'all, come over there. God's doing something down here, right? So I'm sure that they heard the Great Commission from Jesus and they took it to heart. But I mean, this was like crossing over territory that no good Jew would ever do. So literally, I got to give Peter a dream. I got to have him 3 times. I got to send people miraculously to his door, have him come, and before he finishes preaching, the Holy Ghost has got to fall on these people, because otherwise they're not going to believe that what I told them in the beginning is actually true. And then he's going to have to go defend what he did. And so by the 15th chapter, people are saying, well, what do we do with these people? Do we impose this text, these scriptures, which we know, this is all part of our culture and our growing up? And they come to the conclusion, that's not workable. That's just not workable. There are a few things that are going to be important to maintain community here. But we're going to have to find our way together as a community, Jew and Gentile. And it's not going to be easy. And we're still going to have contention and conflicts, but there's just not going to be simple answers. We're going to have to pray through it. We're going to have to discuss through it. We're going to have to disagree through it. But that combination, I say, of suspicion, mostly of myself and my own biases, and humility, I think, is absolutely key.
Yeah, I mean, and I think, oh, go ahead. Yeah.
No, I'm good.
I mean, as you were talking, I was just thinking also about the fact that we often forget that the work of language translation is already always an act of interpretation.
Absolutely.
And I mean, to think that what we read in the New Testament is Greek is a translation from Greek when Jesus is speaking in Aramaic.
Right.
I mean, and it's not written as a real-time record. So I mean, there's just these levels of interpretation that I think we gloss over that have even already taken place on some level, but are hard for us to acknowledge when we invoke the word. Yeah.
Well, I think the impulse among most people, and I get it, is to want things to be clear, simple, and settled. I got it, right? Because so much of life is not clear, not simple at all, and not settled,
Not
right?
settled. Yeah.
Um, and I think it's tough for people to realize that when it comes to understanding the Word of God, it's still true. It's not always clear, it's never simple, and it's rarely settled.
Mm-hmm.
And that process happens in community. It's not handed down through the expertise of, religious leaders. They have to wrestle with each other around this, as well as that larger community and congregation of the faithful. So, as I say, I think we are, for me, this is in some respects exciting. I think exciting again in the same ways that once people could really begin to think hard and long about slavery, it just came to a place where it became intolerable. Once they could really begin to think about the exclusion of half of the human, family, um, that things began to change. And once they could begin to, say, hey, look, we want to support marriage and family, but does that come at the cost of excluding people who've already been traumatized by the loss of a significant relationship with their life? At the very moment when we need to be coming alongside them, we're making them pariahs. Is something wrong with that? It's that process, I think, of being willing to step back and say, look, we all thought this was true. Could it be that maybe we missed something? Maybe we were not, nobody was trying to be bad. Nobody was trying to be terrible. We just missed it. And even more importantly, we missed the impact on people all around us that we love and that God has called us to love.
So we've touched on how it's scriptural. How about theological, doctrinal? And I think that, we sometimes conveniently make distinctions between the scriptural, the theological, and the doctrinal, but then there are other times when we don't. um, so I am interested to know, to what extent um, are these issues also theological, also doctrinal, or not?
I think they are, in the sense that who God really is and what God really requires is of the utmost importance, no question about it. And I believe that many people who are vehemently standing on traditional interpretations around the acceptance or exclusion of people in the LGBT believe that this is exactly what God would have them do. And that's part of their fervor, right? That's part of their, and then I know a lot of other people who find themselves in a place of deep confusion because on the one level, their heart is very much with inclusion, but they can't quite square it, theologically and scripturally, and they just find themselves torn. And so again, I'm assuming the best of motives in many cases for people, but I say all the time, again, if you're good, is producing harm in others, is it time to really re-examine your good? I mean, if your principle is wounding people, it could be time to reevaluate the principle that you're standing on. At least rethink it. And that's the challenge I think we all have. We do want to be principled people, but we constantly find ourselves in this tension between, quote, truth and love. And I don't think that's a tension in God, but it's very much a tension for people, because we do see through a glass darkly. We find it hard to get our own biases and prejudices out of the way. We find it hard to kick over the reins of the traces of things that have been the accepted understanding, not for hundreds, but thousands of years. So, you know, I get it. It's hard. But I would argue it's absolutely necessary.
I think beginning in conversation with people who are directly affected has been particularly helpful. And again, just as Ray, and I'm mesmerized by his conversation, just as he notes, this is a source of significant pain and has been so for generations. So to be in a space where we just pause to listen, to be in conversation and to hear what people's experiences have been and their genuine desire and need to, first of all, to have a sense of being in the family of God, really loving God, and oftentimes having a sense of God being affirming, but the people of God not doing likewise. So it's an important and powerful place to begin, and again, buttressed by Scripture, informed by Scripture, and informed by people's experiences. I'm excited about the possibilities of moving forward.
Thank you so much. I mean, the theological suggestion that I hear is to recenter love and recenter how we understand our desire to love God and also God's love for us, of course, beginning there. We love God because God first loved us. But then from there, how we understand one another's love, if you will. And I mean, and that does kind of come back to this question of a vision for what doctrine becomes, what what teaching flows from that. I want to kind of touch on another kind of social intersection of these questions, which is just if and we'll kind of begin to close here, but you know, distinct approaches to sexual and gender diversity are often raised as like a wedge issue between North American inclusion and affirming contingencies and of the church, and then Caribbean and African contingencies of the church, as though the latter have a singular and monolithic sort of perspective and approach, and it is rejection. How do you respond to that kind of a framing, and how might you reframe this matter?
That's a great question. It is certainly true. I think as the Christian faith has really grown in the non-Western world, the vitality, the power of it has been absolutely wonderful to behold. And I completely understand why, for many people there, you know, given the challenges that we face, we're kind of going with the traditional, right? We're just going to stay there. We believe that's tried and true and tested. I understand that. But part of what I think, and this requires continuing to be in conversation with each other, is those communities are not monolithic any more than the Western community is. It may simply be that there is less room for other viewpoints to be expressed, for very important reasons. The social pressures are much more powerful. The cultural taboos are much stronger. And unfortunately, conservative Christians from the United States who can't get their way here are often going to those countries and absolutely introducing, they literally are trying to reintroduce the Leviticus, because the death penalty is where it's going, right?
Yeah.
So I think there's going to be a process of evolution for those communities, and it will be on their own timetable. But I think that's going to be a function of us continuing to be in connection and in conversation with each other, and to recognize that they are not monolithic, just as we are not monolithic. So, you know, I don't want to say in many of these public debates, everybody's looking for scoring points, right? Got it, right? You want to make your case persuasive. I'm not against persuasive cases. I really am against persuasive cases that come at the cost of people's freedom and sometimes their lives.
Reverend Gloria.
I think it's and this begs a fuller conversation around how around inclusion, right?
Mhm.
And how we stay in a conversation that honors the fullness of the dignity of people in Africa and the Caribbean, and again, how we honor them in their fullness and stay in a conversation around inclusion in so many different contexts.
Yeah. Thank you for naming that, because I guess the hypocrisy that's hidden just under the surface of this is is um, is quite offensive, really, when we do struggle with inclusion um, on other levels and in other ways, and where we cannot deny ways that we perpetuate cultures of inequity. Um, Even within our Zion, right? And so thank you for kind of pointing to the fuller conversations there. So I want to just uh, thank you really for your wisdom, for your insight, and invite you just to offer any closing thoughts that you might have with respect to resources that have been helpful to you along the way with respect to these matters. But also, if you'd like to just close with or offer a God encounter, if you will, that or a story that just really helped you to get in touch with where God was moving you and where God wants you with respect to these matters. indeed, God is source. And so I invite, if you'd like to offer any closing thoughts with respect to resource or source, just the floor is yours.
Sure. I'd say for me, it's what has been so, I've so appreciated the power of just listening to people and being open in a non-judgmental way and just to listen. And again, scriptures are replete with the importance of being open to hear and see people. And in particular, I'd say one person that's been especially important is our grandchild. And to compare their struggle, and they use that their pronouns. And again, all of these things are clunky. We're all working at getting better at that. And to hear the difference in their struggle as a child who was born biologically and has come to identify as non-binary, and the sense of acceptance that they have felt in our family, and how different it was for my brother, for my own brother, and the pain that he experienced in having to cover up for so many decades before he was able to come out and know that we have loved him, and that's growth, and meeting a person where they are, and then to be able to affirm God's love for them, and for them to feel like, yeah, Jesus does love me just as I am.
Yeah, I think we're at a moment where the church is going to have to do what it has had to do over the centuries since its founding. And that is to, as I pointed out back to Acts 15, do its very best to recognize that what it has traditionally thought may be wrong, and that its traditional posture is based on some things that really do need to be re-examined and questioned. Those 10, 11 sort of scriptural pericopes that on which we've made decisions about a whole group of people who are our congregants, our friends, our pastors, our bishops, or whatever it might be, right? We have, on the basis of those scriptures, drawn some conclusions that may be faulty. And that going back to look at the words and what they mean and how they've been interpreted and how they've been translated, and what the context was, is absolutely crucial, because that interpretation has been incredibly harmful to so many people for so many generations. And this is no different than what we've had to do, as I said before, around slavery, around the role of women, around divorce and remarriage, around any of a number of issues. I've lived long enough to know when, as I say, if you were a single parent or a kid born out of wedlock, right, you're going to catch hell. But I believe the church has grown there. It's not fully arrived. And I absolutely believe the church will grow in its understanding of how important it is not to exclude our LGBTQ brothers and sisters.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm so grateful for this conversation and for your wisdom, for the work that you have been doing, just to hear from God and to hear from those in your community and your family, and to respond faithfully. Thank you for your insight. and for this time together.
And Jennifer, let me thank you for also for this opportunity and for the faith that you demonstrated really over your life, and that you have remained in this church, despite the fact that you have not always been accepted. And so I thank you for your faith and your faithfulness to persist nevertheless, and to create this forum for a conversation. And we continue to pray and intercede for you. And again, just appreciate you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.